Welcome to Esoteria. My name's Nick Majerison, and on today's show, we're joined by the creator of the world-famous comic 2000 AD, Pat Mills. Pat, thanks for joining us on today's show. I'm very excited to talk to you. I've got so many things that we're going to be talking to you about today. But the first time that I met you was in a hotel. I was interviewing you for a magazine article that ultimately never got published, and it was probably a 6-hour-long interview. And I largely blame you, Pat Mills, for opening me up to the esoteric world and all of the different subjects that we've covered so far on this show. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do and how you started 2000 AD, the comic?
Okay, well, I'm a comic writer. I write for 2000 AD, I write for various French comic books as well. And I write science fiction, fantasy and horror. And pursuant to, the kind of thing you were interviewing me about, is that I like things to be based on something real. Now, this is actually a bit of a curse for me, because if it's not real, I don't believe in it and I can't write it. So I have to draw on reality, and that's a really big thing for me. Yeah.
So you've been on a journey in your writing, because when you started out, you created 2000 AD as a comic, for people who've not read it, that is run by the green-skinned alien Tharg the Mighty, who's popular with the readership. And you started writing a comic called Slain, alongside pretty much everything else, as far as I'm aware. I mean, you were involved in the comic's most famous creation, Judge Dredd, as well.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us about where your writing took you and how you started out with that?
In the case of Slain, or just in comics generally?
Give us a general overview of how you began in 2000 AD and where your writing took you.
I wanted to write stories that were real. Now, this is a bit of a problem with science fiction, because a lot of science fiction isn't real. It doesn't have anything firm that it's based upon. So in the case of Judge Dredd, okay, it may be set in the future, but it is making a comment, no matter how obliquely, about police oppression today, and indeed when Judge Dredd came out. It's a satire, really. And I think that applies in one way or another to most of my stories. I get very frustrated if I just write complete fiction. It has to have a reality about it. So elsewhere, I read a story called Charlie's War, which is about World War I, and I talked at that time to World War I veterans and read everything I could. But you actually reach a point when you're writing where you actually get fed up just getting stuff out of books. Now, it isn't always possible to draw on real life. But as far as I can, I do. So I've done a fair bit of traveling to some odd places in the world, and I've met some very odd people, and they're a great source of inspiration for my stories. So
some of the stories that you've written are incredibly fantastical. I mean, obviously they're science fiction. Give us an example of something that you've written about that you've found out to be true, that's based in truth.
Well, I mean, in the case of Slain, for example, I started off writing some stories about esoteric themes and what you might call the ancient astronaut theory of UFOs and all the rest of it. Now, I had no background in that direction at all. And I read a couple of books, the classics that many people will be familiar with, The Sirius Mystery and The Dark Gods. And the Dark Gods is very much about a Lovecraftian view of aliens or ultra-terrestrials, and The Sirius Mystery suggests that kind of ancient astronaut theory, but not in that von Daniken way, which I think has been quite heavily criticised and debunked.
Now, let's just clarify for people who are not aware, the ancient astronaut theory is the idea that we have been visited, but that it happened almost in prehistoric times, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to explain a little bit about it for people that don't know about this idea?
Yeah, I think The Sirius Mystery is well worth checking out, because I think the book's been around since the late 70s by Robert Temple, I think. And it goes back to the dawn of civilization, and it describes how there are these fish-like beings who come out of the the sea and teach human beings the basis of civilization. And this is one of the very earliest myths or legends, but it's very well detailed. And Robert Temple looks at that and extrapolates from that the idea of that our civilization has been influenced by an external force.
And is this a fiction book, or is this a...
No, this is a non-fiction book by an academic, and that's why I think the Sirius mystery is very well regarded. So when I read that, I thought, okay, this provides a good basis, alongside the Dark Gods, for my Celtic hero Slain, a kind of Conan-esque barbarian, to explore what you might call elder gods, dark gods, etc. And that, if you like, I'd started off with a completely, just getting it out of books. But as I proceeded, as time went on, I found a real-life echo.
So you started writing about human beings being possessed by gods and by underwater creatures, and certainly that's a theme that you look at in modern-day Slain.
Yeah.
And ironically, as I mentioned a moment ago, Tharg the Mighty, the alien editor of 2000 AD, the green-skinned alien editor, who's quite tyrannical. So some people believe, I mean, David Icke being the most well-known, believe that this kind of thing actually happens in real life. When you started writing about these things, did you believe that?
Not when I was, not on those very early Slains. It took two, if you like, real-life encounters for me to change my views and to think, well, there is something in this, yeah.
You had real-life encounters. What do you mean?
Well, when I say real-life encounters, there were two of them, and I think they bear out this theory that if you take an interest in something, it will start to take an interest in you. Now, I don't think this just applies to the esoteric and the occult. It probably applies to everything. It's that synchronicity that happens to us all. In other words,
that's an occult idea, isn't it?
It is seen as an occult idea, but I think it actually has very widespread manifestations. You know, I could be interested in travelling to Ecuador, and if it's something I'm really passionate about, the chances are I might meet somebody from Ecuador on the railway station. And we all have those kind of experiences. But specific to this Slain story, very shortly after I had written about these dark gods, two events happened. One was where a researcher into what you might call the esoteric got in touch with me, and he said, I want to send you this account I'm writing. And I was curious, and he sent it in, and it was kind of the sort of material that you would get in the Sirius mystery. It was not publishable because the way he was writing was what I would call very circular. It didn't have a linear construction. But it was fascinating, and he had tremendous insights into things like early Babylonian civilization. He was writing about that. He was writing about modern psychology. In other words, a complete spectrum of the esoteric. And naturally, I was quite excited by what he was writing. I made it very clear to him early on that I couldn't help him. In other words, it couldn't be published. But what was fascinating was he said, well, you're meant to have it anyway. I thought, what do you mean, meant to have it anyway? So he sent this document to me in chunks. And over the course of about 2 years, the document built up. And I kid you not, it was about that high off the ground. In other words, it's a massive document. He was writing it, it was clear because he was driven. Now, many of us as writers are driven by different things. But this seemed a very, very odd thing. And okay, I thought, well, fair enough. You know, it's interesting for me to read. But after a while, I said to him, why are you writing this? What is this all about? And he said, be patient, you will discover as this goes on. And as we got, if you like, towards the end of the document, it started to be about UFOs, which he referred to as the ships. And he described them as very beautiful and everything. Now, my first reaction there was very cynical. In other
Because at
words,
that point you didn't believe in aliens.
no.
Right.
So I mean, anybody who's watching this, please don't switch off the TV. I mean, I was like any kind of skeptic. I was saying, you know, this is, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know whether it's true or not. But, you know, I've read all the kind of, you know, UFO classics, and I've read all the kind of debunking things, you know, their weather balloons, their low-flying aircraft, et cetera, et cetera. And I really wanted to keep my feet very much on the ground. And so I think I was a little bit disappointed when I thought, OK, UFOs. And the correspondence continued. And then after a period of time, he said, do you want to see them? I thought, yeah, right. Like you can bring them to order.
So he's asking you if you want to see,
I want to see them.
UFO.
Yeah.
Pop round for a chat.
Well, you know, first of all, above everything else, I'm a writer, right? You know, and a bit like a reporter, I will go anywhere for a story. So I'm thinking, okay, and it'd be interesting to meet him anyway, because by now, and I felt sad that I couldn't help him. He'd written this colossal document, which was unpublishable. And yet it did have quite a lot of nuggets of wisdom. You know, it was a complete spectrum of the esoteric, including one or two original insights of his own. Quite a few, actually, I think.
So he takes you to meet a UFO. Where do you meet the UFO?
Okay, so he invites me. I live in the south of England, and he invited me up to the Midlands. And he said, well, the only thing is, he said, you know, you can write about it, talk about it, but don't give the exact location, which is, I mean, this was some 20 years ago, but obviously I have to honour that. And so I had to stay overnight in his house, and I met his wife, his children, lovely family. And all the time I'm thinking, okay, yeah, this is all going to be, you know, there's going to be some explanation as to why they don't turn up.
You're still very sceptical at this point.
I was extremely sceptical. And so he said, well, we'll go up to this particular place, and we will see them. We will probably see them. And I was thinking, probably, yeah. In other words, I'm as skeptical as the next person on these things. And
so, I mean, I imagine that you're going into that experience expecting to see, I don't know, maybe some bloke chuck a frisbee or something. And did you see it? You know, that kind of thing.
I was
also
expecting
have
a
been
catch.
involved in these kind of...
Because anybody who has not had a UFO experience or is, what shall we say, very much a product of this age, is going to look at this with a certain amount of skepticism and say, where's the catch? And my own family was saying, yeah, right, you know, so Dad's going up to, you know, the Midlands to see this. It's all very sceptical. And I said, well, OK, let's see what happens. So we went to this particular location near the city, and we started to see them. That's quite
OK, now I know this
I need to take you through that.
I know this is a story that's got some length to it, and I know that it's multifaceted, and there's more than one UFO experience involved here. Do you want to talk us through the first experience that you told me about, the first time that I met you, and then maybe after the break we'll go into the other two?
OK. Well, there, if you like, there were... Well, it was one experience, but there were like four different visuals, if you like, on it. And the first one, okay, so just to set the scene, it's a winter afternoon. It's mid-afternoon. It's a clear blue sky. I'm actually cold and a bit bored because we're just hanging around there. There's a group of us because, you know, he had a number of families and friends who were interested in this. I wouldn't say it was like it was almost a cult, if you see what I mean. And so the first one comes over, and it's a distant light. So the skeptic in me immediately comes into being and says, could that be a low-flying aircraft? I'm looking at it and thinking, no, there's no body on the thing. It's just a light. And my second reaction is, how disappointing. You know, I've come all this way. And OK, and all I'm going to see is just you know, OK, maybe it is a UFO, but it's a bit boring, you know. I mean, I write science fiction for a living. I'm expecting Steven Spielberg. Yeah. And so then the third reaction is, and I said something quite stupid, actually. I said, I'm trying to rationalise it. So I'm saying, what could it be? And I said, you know, maybe it's a hang glider with lights. which is complete rubbish. I mean, who on earth goes hang gliding in the Midlands with a light on? I mean, somebody's going to write in now and say they do.
At the time, fear manifests itself, doesn't it, as a desire for a rational explanation?
I had to rationalise it. So, and this gentleman who had introduced me to them said, he said, that's a good one. I haven't heard that one before.
So he's used to this?
He's used to it. That's interesting. You see, we have to rationalise it. In other words, we say, well, was it a weather balloon? Was it But at the end of the day, the experience is, it clearly exists. It clearly isn't a hang glider with lights, but it's a bit dull, you know?
I'm going to hold you there a second, Pat.
OK.
We'll get back soon and talk about the other experiences and in more detail the one you're talking about next here on Esoteria. Welcome to Esoteria. My name's Nick Majerison, and at the moment we're talking to Pat Mills, the creator of the comic book 2000 AD and the writer of some of possibly the best comics ever written, in my opinion. Pat, moments ago we were talking to you about your UFO experience, your first UFO experience. You're a skeptic at the time. You've gone with some people that you know who claim to be able to call UFOs down, and you're looking off in the distance, and there's a light flashing in the distance which they're telling you is an extraterrestrial UFO. How are you feeling at the time?
A bit disappointed because, OK, I can't explain it, but it's not that exciting. And when when you're in the fiction business, you get used to quite dramatic images. So that was the first one. Then two more came over, and they came closer. And OK, there's no body to them. There's no way of explaining them as whatever the usual explanations for these things are, weather balloons or whatever. It's a very clear winter afternoon, about 2, 3 o'clock, something like that. Now, when these second two, they came over and they came closer. And the thing when you're observing something, a lot's happening very fast. And I'm absolutely happy with saying that this could be an entirely subjective experience. I wrote it down at the time. Repeating it now, it sounds bonkers, and I'm happy with that. In other words, if people say, oh, well, you know, he's a writer, he's got a fertile imagination and a furtive one as well, that's OK. I don't have a problem with that. But two things struck me. One was I got a kind of like a pleasant feeling. It was a bit like, I don't know, it was like this thing was sort of, it was like it was reaching out to me in some way, which actually made me feel quite hostile. You know, in other words, OK, this thing's coming at me, or this is a light, but I'm feeling suddenly a little euphoric. And I'm a bit of a control freak, so that, for me, didn't do a lot for me. In other words, I'm not thinking, oh, how wonderful. Now, everyone around me is saying, oh, aren't they beautiful? The ships are here and all this kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know. I'm very suspicious. I'm very grounded. So that was one reaction. The other one, which again, maybe it was my imagination, but I don't think it was. I wrote it down at the time. Looking back on it, it seems a bit bonkers. It was almost like there was some kind of it was almost like an attempt at an aircraft engine or something. Now that, of course, suggests, oh, well, maybe it was an aircraft. It wasn't. You know, the direction of it, the height and everything else. But OK, you know, it's almost like the thing has got a kind of chameleon effect. And it's worth stressing at this point, it was obvious from everybody else's reactions, the thing, whatever they were seeing, was different to what I was seeing. In other words, they're seeing something beautiful. All I'm seeing are some unexplained lights which are coming very close. They don't have a body, and they seem to have some kind of, I would say, relatively subjective experience to me.
So you're looking at the same thing, but you're seeing different things?
I think we're seeing something different. OK, maybe they're true believers, they're seeing what they want to see. But when we got to the last one, it's a different ballgame. Well,
like you say, there are 3 experiences in total, aren't there? So the second thing that you saw, I mean, what was that? Describe that to us. What
you mean the final thing, or just were just basically lights which were coming closer. But then when we got to, if you like, the final one, that's the payoff. In other words, suddenly I have to be a true believer. you
Okay,
know?
well, tell us about that. What happened?
Okay, so what I see then is this kind of, and this is an organic thing. It's organic. It's kind of like an embryo, like a jellyfish, something like that. It doesn't have trails or anything, but it's a kind of roughly disc-like shape. It's sort of translucent, like a jellyfish, or almost like an embryo or something, and it's kind of pulsing across the sky. Now, I'm exaggerating how it was pulsing, but the feeling was like that, you know. Right. It was that kind of feeling. And I'm thinking...
How far away is this? I mean, how far away is this thing from you?
Well, that's a difficult thing to judge, because... you know, if you see an aircraft or something in the sky, you can roughly judge. It wasn't that far away, let's put it that way. But the scale of the thing, you have no way of judging. If you see a bird or swan going through the air, you can say, well, it was that far away, whatever. But you don't know what this thing is.
Yeah, you've nothing to reference it to.
Exactly so.
Before, yeah.
And the thing that my first reaction, of course, was that this sounds a bit... what should I say, a bit tardy on my part, because I'm thinking, oh, it's not the Steven Spielberg thing, it's organic. I'm thinking, well, it's not meant to be organic. You know, why is it organic? I'm expecting, you know, real hardware.
Metallic disc, yeah.
Exactly. And although in the back of my mind I was aware that there was a book which actually covers such organic source, that wasn't really uppermost in my mind. I was expecting, they were talking about ships. And this is why, as I say, I think their reaction to the thing was different to mine. They still went on referring to them as the ships and talking about them as beautiful. So now either that's just they're using an inappropriate phrase, or they're actually seeing something different to me. And I think it's a mixture of the two. I think there is a subjective experience with UFOs. In other words, wouldn't say it's you see what you want to see, but I think the way they affect us, that they're something we don't usually see, or perhaps even meant to see. So when our minds see them, perhaps we translate them into something that is reasonably plausible. Now, for me, seeing an embryo, as it were, or a jellyfish type thing pulsing across the sky, I venture to suggest that that could not possibly be something that my mind has made sense of. I think it actually has to be what they are.
So it's not something you expected to see?
Absolutely not. I wanted to see Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and here I'm seeing something that's impressive. But it's like anything that's quite exciting. You actually want more. In other words, you're left asking a lot of questions, and you know you really want to see it again, or you want to think, you know, where do we go from here?
So this, I mean, how big was this thing? I'm trying to picture it as hard as possible.
As far as I could say, I would say it was the size, and this is a subjective judgment here. I would say it was the size of a large aircraft, and it was quite close. It was quite close. This wasn't some, what should we say, tiny object, whatever, and it was moving, and it didn't have any kind of effect on me. And as I say, it's a little churlish of me to say I was mildly disappointed with it, because it wasn't what I was expecting to see, you know?
What a strange experience, though. So you have that experience, and at that point you're a writer, and you're writing science fiction, and you're writing about this kind of thing. You've taken an interest in it. It started to take an interest in me, yeah. In you. So, I mean, how did that affect your work? Because already, I mean, you'd been writing about, you know, green-skinned aliens running comics. You've been writing about Slain, you know, sort of a Conan the Barbarian figure who's fighting against often creatures that are possessed by an extraterrestrial influence. I mean, does it make you believe in that stuff when you saw that, or were you still a skeptic, or how did it leave you?
Well, I couldn't be skeptical anymore. But what I was, I think it's fair to say then and now, I'm kind of a little bit hostile towards the idea. I think, a couple of reasons. One, because I think people who seem to be involved with UFOs, I know one or two people, they're often quite damaged by it. Now, whether they're damaged before or after, or whether it's interrelated, but it's a quite well-known thing. I think viewers who have some experience with this would probably agree. Now, of course, it's also almost a way of saying, well, they must be a nut, you know, they imagined it or whatever. But they do seem to be damaged by it. I don't think it's actually a very good thing. So I have a natural hostility towards the idea. But of course, I'm a writer, I'm curious. So I'm a little bit torn between those two things. And also I have friends who have, if you like, a perspective on this, and were able to tell me about their perspective. And I was aware of that when I was witnessing this experience. In fact, I should add, after seeing it, you know, the gentleman who'd shown me this, he said, next time, he said, you know, they'll come even closer, he said, you know. And he actually talked about, you know, interacting with them and everything. Mm-hmm. And I think I did the right thing. I decided not to go back because I don't think it was actually having a great effect on him. Mm-hmm. I don't think it was benefiting him. And I was aware of other people who have actually been damaged by these things and seem to have had uncomfortable experiences. And I thought, OK, I've seen them. OK, do I want to go back and perhaps get a bit more involved in these things? They clearly mess with your head. Well, I thought, I don't want that.
I've always said I wouldn't want to see a UFO, you know. I have enough problems dealing with reality as it is without having that thrown into my world. So I've always avoided any experience like that.
Yeah. And I think that's why I thought I'm not going to go back. It's a bit chicken on my part because I'm a writer and I'd probably have got more of a story out of it. But I think, you know, you have to protect yourself and you don't go into... I think they are a bit dangerous. I'm delighted that they exist. Friends of mine have a theory as to how they work approximately, in as much as any of us can. And being aware of that theory and using it in stories, that's almost enough for me. Because, as I say, I'm actually quite hostile to the idea of creator gods, actually.
You're hostile to the idea of...
Yeah, I think it's a sort of... it's an imposition on who we are as human beings. In other words, somebody's messing around with our DNA or whatever, if that is the case. And... you know, I think, yeah, I'm not comfortable with that.
Well, I know that's a theory that you've touched on your work, and we'll talk about that some more in the next part.
Okay.
The idea that there is an extraterrestrial influence that is changing and affecting political events in the world. And before we get into the third part, do you believe that to be the case now?
I think there is something... I think that I would put it like this, that a phrase that's often used is ultra-terrestrials. In other words, they've always been there. In other words, this phenomena, this organic phenomena is one aspect of them. I think they've always been there. They've always messed around with us. So if that's the case in modern times, there's no different to before. I think it's a subtle process. If people don't believe in it, that's okay. But I think it does have some effect on us, yeah.
Okay, yeah. And well, we'll get to that soon, and we'll get to the theories that David Icke has and the way that your work kind of ties in with that. You're watching Esoteria at the moment, and we're talking to Pat Mills, the writer of many brilliant comic books, and also the creator of the world-famous comic 2000 AD. Make sure you're with us in the next part.
Lizards, whatever. Well, I can't say that I've actually seen a reptile, but I've seen a reptile type figure, a demon with little horns on his head, yeah, and the vibration of them, when you feel it, you'll know about it when you come in contact with it. So these demon come entities, come reptiles, they seem to be in the fourth dimension. We live in a three-dimensional world. We're in the third dimension. These seem to be around the Earth and in the Earth in underground bases, and I think this is where a lot of UFOs are coming from as well. These entities have been here since whenever. They seem to be coming out of this other dimension. They can shapeshift. They can appear, disappear to your vision, and they can possess people, and they do. The reptilians, as I say, I've never seen them myself, but I have seen demons, and these demons can possess people, and one of the worst things, and they seem to have made it the fashion again with the new age stuff, and that is the Ouija board. It's the most dangerous thing that basically you can do, other than going in deeply into the occult, because once you're in it, you can't turn the clock back. You're in it, and you can get possessed. Believe me, you can. These entities seem to operate out of the normal, as I say, your vision. But when they materialise, slow down their vibration, you can see them, just like a spirit of any type, because we're all atoms, just revolving round molecules and atoms, and it's the speed that they're going. Well, the Ouija board, when they put the alphabet round on a table, or you've bought a Ouija board with the alphabet on and the yes and no on it, you can attract real evil. You don't know who you're doing this board with, what's in their subconscious, what's attracting them. They're going to attract them. And it's like opening the door.
Do you think there's a chance that shape-shifting lizards that live in a hollowed out earth, who exist in the lower fourth dimension, could exist?
Well, you know, never say never, but I think it's extremely unlikely. So, you know, yeah, there's a possibility, but probably not.
Yeah, I'm a member of the club, actually, yeah.
Christ.
Well, I suppose it's possible, really, if you think back to the theory of evolution and stuff, but it's a bit weird to think that, but I don't know, guess so, maybe.
That's the most sensible question you've asked me so far.
Welcome to Esoteria. My name's Nick Majerison. Currently, we're joined by Pat Mills, the creator of the comic 2000 AD. And Pat, we were talking moments ago about how you started off writing about various different themes in 2000 AD many years ago. And then if you take an interest in something, it takes an interest in you. We just covered the fact that you had a UFO experience, which made you a UFO believer, so to speak. And now you're covering work in Slain, which is one of your current stories that's running in 2000 AD. That's been described as Ikean, in that it puts forward the idea that some sort of reptilian entity has been directing events for many years. Do you want to tell us about that and how you got into that idea?
Yeah, well, the background, first of all, was the Sirius mystery, as I mentioned earlier, that this describes some kind of fish-like beings and so forth, and it's a myth, it's a legend, but it's quite a remarkable one. And so, if you like, that was the kick-off point. Secondly, when I started writing about this stuff some 20 years back, some people from a hereditary coven came along, and again, you take an interest in something, it takes an interest in you. And they said, oh, you know, we're fascinated by what you're writing about, because for us, this is part of, something we happen to believe in.
So for these guys, it's a given.
Yeah, because they're from a hereditary coven. Now, skeptics will say there are no such thing as hereditary covens.
What is a hereditary?
Well, you have a coven, right, which goes passed down transgenerational. Right now, the idea of, if you like, the skeptical point of view is that covens are something that's just come up in the last, 100 years or so. They're kind of Aleister Crowley influenced or whatever.
And is a coven a collection of?
It's a collection of pagans, really, right. Pagans, witches, whatever, and I have no reason to doubt that it is actually transgenerational. And their approach to the whole thing was quite laid back. And for a long time, they didn't really want to talk that much about it. They just said, oh, well, it's nice to know somebody's writing about what they described as the newts, which, if you like, are ultra-terrestrials who seem to manifest themselves in a variety of ways, subjectively, objectively. But they had a catch-all phrase for it, and if you like, the way you could identify them was that this is something that messes around with us in one shape or another. And, you know, whether it's reptilian or whether it's fish-like, whether it's UFOs or whatever it is, you know, that's quite a good catchphrase to cover it all. And this predated, of course, David Icke's stuff.
Well, you see, this is the thing, Pat, because I remember reading a comic strip that I think is grossly underrepresented called Finn. And in Finn, you were taking these themes, and as a young chap was reading about newts that were supported by kind of you did a version of sort of a Masonic order that was supporting them and their network. And then Finn was a witch who was fighting against them. And those themes, like I say, they've been picked up in Slain and developed to the nth degree. But Slain is obviously set in an earlier period.
In Slain, one can be a lot more colourful about this material. You can be a lot more dramatic. And, of course, there's a stronger fantasy element. But it allows one to pursue this kind of thing. Because if you're going to have creator gods, which is a hallmark of most fantasy, you know, you have these kind of alien beings or whatever, they might as well be based on something real. In other words, if I'm going to write about something, I want to believe in it to some degree.
So do you believe that these things are real and that there are extraterrestrial newt, lizard, creator gods?
I'm not sure it's as theatrical as the version that David Icke describes. I think, as I was saying earlier, my UFO experience was mildly disappointing. Although in fact it's still impressive, and I have a feeling whatever it is almost a natural phenomenon. They've always been around. There's no invasion. It's just how things are. And on a purely personal level, as long as they don't mess with me, I don't want to mess with them. I think.
But hang on a minute, though. Aren't you messing with them ever so slightly? Because and I know we've got some of the pictures of Slain. I mean, Slain.
That's true.
Actually urinates. on one of these lizards, you know.
Yes, that's a good
point.
point.
In a sequence towards the end, I mean, there we go. We can see Slain has beaten him. He's lying on the ground, and in the next page, Slain gets his little man out and urinates literally all over the lizard there. So you're kind of messing with them a bit, to be honest.
I guess that's fair. And I suppose also, I mean, it's a while since I wrote that, but I think it demonstrates, or is demonstrating to me anyway, I mean, at the time, I think I must have, if you'll forgive the pun, been a bit pissed off with the idea of, if you like, intruders, you know, people who are messing with our consciousness. Now, exactly how they do it and so forth, I don't think anyone has an exact template. I think we're all struggling to define this. There is something out there. There is something, and we've all got our theories of them. Some are more dramatic than others. Some are more theatrical than others. But I think it's all an attempt to describe some phenomena that cannot be dismissed entirely as, you know, either delusions or fantasies or, low-flying aircraft, whatever it is. We don't have a vocabulary to define it properly.
So we lack the language too.
I think so, although ironically, I would say back in, I think it was the 1930s, Charles Fort, in a book called The Book of the Damned. Just to set the scene here, Charles Fort collected odd accounts. He went through every newspaper. I think he was in a New York library, and he went through them all, and he collected all these weird stories, which were all authenticated. In other words, the classic ones are flying frogs and all that kind of stuff, but there was a fair number of UFOs. But how he defined it, and I don't think anybody has actually put it better than him. He said something like this: I believe we are property. I believe we belong to something or someone. To them, we are like sheep or cattle. So why don't they communicate with us? Do we have an embassy for sheep? Do we have an ambassador for cattle? He said, but that's how they view us. And just as sheep or cattle probably have a very vague idea of what on earth human beings are, putting them in a field and then eventually taking them off to the slaughterhouse, I think that's roughly if you like, the ultra-terrestrials' perspective on us. We can hazard guesses, and I think some of them are very theatrical. But I think Charles Fort actually put it the very best of any of us.
Essentially reducing us to cattle, being controlled by maybe extraterrestrial or maybe evolved here on this planet.
We're property of something, and the chances are, if you're in a field, you live out your life, and you don't really have, you don't interrelate with it that much, and it's not that much of a problem.
But imagine if you found a sheep who'd written a comic strip about the farmer being urinated on.
Yes, that's
after
a
being
good point.
beaten senseless by a muscular barbarian.
Yeah.
You'd be annoyed with that sheep.
Yeah, I think I suppose that's a fair point. Yeah, was that a good idea? Well, I'm still here. I'm not. I don't think I'm behaving in any particularly eccentric way. So what does that mean? That it doesn't matter, maybe. That's one possibility. My pagan friends claim, and I have no way of knowing whether this is true, it's almost like they say that there are rules on these things. In other words, there's somehow, some things that happen, and perhaps it doesn't actually matter. Maybe it's the whole thing. Who cares about what somebody says in a comic book? It's just a bloody comic.
But it puts into context, doesn't it, that Tharg, the editor of 2000 AD, the green-skinned alien, who I mentioned right at the beginning of the show, a tyrannical green-skinned alien who runs the comic book, and this is before you got into those ideas. It's interesting, isn't it?
Well, I think what's interesting is that my negativity towards aliens also includes Tharg. I was one of the, I think, 3 co-creators of Tharg, and I really wish I hadn't.
The alien editor.
They won't get rid of him now, but no, I think, I'm actually quite hostile towards Tharg. So obviously, this sort of, what should I say, negative view of aliens goes back right to the beginning of 2000 AD. And similarly, as I was describing when I saw these UFOs with other people, and they were all saying, oh, aren't they beautiful? Look, they're here. I'm thinking, beautiful? I don't know. In other words, why don't they sod off? That's my reaction. I'm not sure where that comes from, but it's you can see from the Slain example, it's quite heartfelt. Yeah.
So are you a pagan yourself?
Yeah.
Whereabouts do you stand? Do you believe in things like magic and the occult and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'm a pagan myself. I'm what you might call, if we're looking for a shorthand way of describing this, I'd describe myself as a Gnostic pagan. In other words, I think the answers are in here. I don't think the answers are in books, whether it is any of the Orthodox religions' books, or whether it is, the various Libers of Aleister Crowley. As far as I'm concerned, the answer, you believe in yourself. And that's something I feel with great passion. I'm very sceptical and a little bit hostile towards, thinking that the answer is in somebody else's, make your own mind up.
That makes sense to me. So this is Esoteria, and he's Pat Mills, who, like I say, still writes some of the best comics ever written, in my opinion. One of the few geniuses in the field. This is Esoteria, and I want to thank you for joining us on today's show. And I don't know about you, around about this time, I'd quite like to have some Alice D.
I'm Alice D, and I force you to think. I'm Alice D, the goddess. Spellcasting 1, 2, 3, Alice D. The Bible says, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Gandhi once said, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. He was wrong. Actually, it'd leave one bloke with one eye left over, and everyone concerned would just be annoyed. So perhaps Gandhi should have said, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world annoyed, and most people entirely blind, apart from one bloke who'd have one eye. Add that to another quote. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So, actually, perhaps Gandhi should have said, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world annoyed, and most people entirely blind, apart from one bloke who's got one eye, and he is the king. If I was him, I imagine I wouldn't bother wearing a crown. You'd only be wearing it for your own benefit. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, perhaps Gandhi should have said, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world annoyed, and most people entirely blind, apart from one bloke who's got one eye, and he's their corrupt king, who probably doesn't bother wearing a crown. No point really. Messes up your hair. I told all this to a mate of mine, and he said, here's another saying for you, Alice. No one likes a smart ass. So, perhaps Gandhi should have said nothing at all. Saved a lot of confusion. I'm Alice D, and I love you.
It was really scary.
It was scary for you. I had to get the doors kept opening on each floor, so I was like,
The sense of the oneness with all things is nothing new. In Hindu tradition, there is a word used to express the part of ourselves which understands this connection, the Atman. The Atman is the soul which recognizes the Atman of all existence. It is part of the whole and yet the whole itself. Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst, often used a story which expressed the lack of understanding we have in the West for such concepts, stating that our Christianized personas failed utterly to comprehend non-linear ideas. The story goes like this. An initiate visited his master one day and asked about the Atman. How would he recognize the Atman in others? The master said that that was the role of the Atman, and that even the Atman within an elephant would recognize another. The next day, the initiate was walking along a path when he saw an elephant and a rider. Deciding that his own Atman and that of the elephants would have knowledge of each other, he walked on and into the path of the great beast. The rider shouted and screamed at the initiate to move out of the way, but he refused to listen to the rider, trusting instead in the wise words of his master. The elephant also refused to move and lifted the initiate up into the air with his trunk and threw the young adept some distance. The initiate, bruised and shocked, went to see his master the following day and complained bitterly. The master simply stated, "You failed to listen to the rider. He too has the Atman, as do all things." Because of the mindset of the West, we have to deal with everything in a box-like linear fashion, not understanding symbolisms and parable for what they often are, intrinsic deep truths, the mysteries of all things. Instead, we break the world apart and reduce it down to constituent parts, and then we can no longer see the whole, the Atman, the One. Every action, every thought, intention, and idea has a consequence in the whole. Refusing or failing to listen to the Atman from wherever it derives is a failing of the West. For the Atman is the true self, and now we struggle to even comprehend this. Our arrogance and aloofness is our persona, and before we know it, some great beast will come along and throw us from our path because we have refused to listen. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Zen Buddhist proverb. You cannot wake a person who is pretending to be asleep. Navajo proverb. Who is more foolish, the child afraid of the dark, or the man afraid of the light? Maurice Freehill. No matter where you go or what you do, you live your entire life within the confines of your head. Terry Josephson.
Now, the Australians, a very warm country, they love their sun, they love their activities and their sports and getting out and about, right? And so in Australia, they really enjoy the sun, or they did. Now they're petrified of it. We have scared them to death because there might be or might not be a layer of ozone, which is there like some lead roof protecting them from the sun or not protecting them from the sun. But it isn't like a lead roof. It's very flimsy at best, and there's bound to be holes down here. But what the Australians did is stop their kids going on the beach. Completely almost. Isn't that terrible? When, we need our vitamin D, which we get from the sun. It's part of life. My wife always, brighter as soon as the sun comes out. We live in Great Britain, so it doesn't happen very often. But she's very bright as soon as the sun comes out, much brighter. And she's always bright. Okay. So we're now stopping our kids soaking up a bit of sun. By all means, butter up. By all means, protect yourself a little bit, because there's nothing worse than a burnt skin. And when you see lobster-red people on holiday, you feel sorry for them, but you also feel what idiots to have got in that state. Okay. They started selling sun cream in Australia like you wouldn't believe. And then suddenly they found the incidence of skin cancer was going up and up and up and up, compared to what it had been when they hadn't been scared. And we've now found that the skin cancer was caused by the sun creams. So you see, the human race has developed on Earth and is really very comfortable on Earth. We're the best, most efficient species. We've been so successful in managing the way we live on Earth. Our life expectancy is growing up, everything. We're very commendable. But so many other animals and creatures like ants and beetles and things like this have all done very, very well and all fare very well on Earth. But we've done very well. And we've done very well because we have an ambience with nature and an ambience with the natural world. What science today is doing is throwing us at different directions off this sensible path time and time again and scaring us witless of the problems with living on Earth, where in actual fact it's very natural for us to do it. And anything that nature throws at us is either good for us, or if it's bad for us, it's usually bright coloured. So you can tell it's got something about it. And our own instincts, which we pass on, understand. We don't eat poisonous things because we don't upset ourselves to it. So there's this natural balance. Right from Dalton, this natural balance of life on Earth, this natural ambience between animals and plants, all of it is so beautiful. You can't live your life in this beautiful world, the beautiful chances we've got, if at every turn we're scared that we'll even death by what the scientists or the media are telling us, and especially if it's erroneous in the first place. It's a tragedy. Now, I've been watching a spider only this last few weeks. I built a spider's web outside my window in my office, and I've been watching. He caught a moth the other day, or the web caught the moth, and he manhandled or spider handled this moth that size, and the spider's the size of the end of the finger, and this moth, it manhandled, the spider handled it, I should say, dragged it up the web over ages and ages and ages until he got it in the corner of the window, and there started to suck the innards out of it and devour it. Now, I can't see that creature has got any less intelligence than a human being. But you say, but you can't cram that much intelligence into a creature that big. I don't think we know the half of it. No. I really don't. And I think science will help us to find that. Now, that's wonderful science. Yeah.
There is this very peculiar idea in religion that there is a God who is somehow outside of ourselves. Balderdash. I'm sorry. You know, there is a rhythm, if you want to call it, a power, whatever you want to call it, which perhaps started with Big Bang, maybe it started before Big Bang, I don't know. But that interconnects with absolutely everything. Now, our world, all the other worlds, all the planets, all the universes, parallel universes, whatever there may be, every blade of grass, every animal is interconnected in some way, shape or form. And if you want to call the overall thing God, fine. But God is part of us, we're part of God. So is he part of my cat. So is he, he's even part of the bricks. I mean, even if you make a brick of something, that brick actually has an energy level.